A millionaire offered his wife a divorce, but this was not the response he expected. Have you ever felt that your seemingly perfect life is really just an illusion? Everything that seemed important to you suddenly becomes unimportant, like a paper ship sinking in a stormy ocean. Here is Alexei, a billionaire, a successful entrepreneur with an iron character, who knows how to manage everyone except himself. It would seem that he has everything: a luxurious house, expensive cars, a successful career. He is not used to losing. But today he decides to make a move that will shock everyone. He offers his wife a divorce. Now, pay attention. Do not rush to draw conclusions. Alexei's words sound clear, confident. He sits behind a huge oak desk in his office. His gaze is cold, but on his lips a barely perceptible grin. And, of course, you want to understand why. Why is he deciding this now? What makes a man who has everything give up the most precious thing in his life, his wife, his family? Just like that. I think we need to talk, he says, as if it's a normal conversation, as if nothing has happened, as if his words don't drive an axe through his heart. And there she is, Anna, a woman who, it would seem, should be in shock, with tears in her eyes, with screaming and accusations. But no. She sits across from him, at ease, as if it's not her life being broken to pieces. She doesn't react to his words. It's her reaction that makes her nervous. She doesn't throw herself into tears, she doesn't scream, she doesn't make a scene. She just doesn't say anything. What is it? Fear? Confusion? Or had she known for a long time that this moment was coming? And if so, why didn't she do something sooner? She just stares at him, without emotion, as if viewing him as some object that no longer matters. And then you begin to realize, in that silence lies something far more complex than you might expect. So why is he taking this step? He could have just kept quiet, gone on with his life as before. Couldn't he? Pause. Seconds that stretch like an eternity. Alexei continues to speak, but now his words are not so confident. An almost elusive shadow of doubt appears on his face. He presses his lips together. This wasn't part of the plan. I don't know how to go on with my life. All this time I've been ignoring everything. His words are slurred, as if he himself doesn't realize what's going on. But that doesn't make them any less weighty. They're as weighty as the pounds of paper that have fallen to the floor, and each sheet is a decision he's made in a dark office, far away from everyone. Anna is still as silent as ever. And perhaps in her silence lies the worst truth of all. The moment she stopped fighting for anything. When she realized that this marriage was an empty shell that could be destroyed with a single word. Why doesn't she scream? Why doesn't she try to fight? Why doesn't she tear off his mask and say, "You don't want this, Alexei. You're not capable of it"? No. She just sits there. And that look in her eyes penetrates him deeper than 1,000 words. And now Alexei is the one who doesn't know what to do. He doesn't understand what's happening, what should be happening. He can't answer the question he asked himself. Alexei was not just successful. He was what they call a master of the game. There was always a cold glint in his eyes, as if he was already several steps ahead of everyone around him. There were always a lot of people around him. Partners, friends, female fans, colleagues. But it wasn't the spotlight that mattered to him. He was used to people addressing him with respect. Too used to it. His life had become not just an expensive pastime, but a goal he had achieved despite all the adversity. Make $1 million? That was easy. But keeping it? That was more difficult. Alexei knew the value of money, but over the years he realized that the real value lay in something else. He grew up without a father, learned to be strong and not show weakness. He built an empire that seemed as indestructible as a fortress on a hill. But no one had told him how difficult it could be to control his feelings. And now, as he sat at the table, proposing a divorce to his wife, he realized he was not in control of his own life. He loved her, or at least he loved the idea that she was his. Anna, his wife, was not just a woman in his life. She was part of his image, part of his greatness. Without her, perhaps there would be nothing else. But somehow, in an instant, it all began to crumble like a house of cards. He just didn't know when it happened. "You already understand everything, don't you?" he asked, looking at her but not expecting an answer. He was as confident as ever. But somewhere inside, in the very depths, there was one question he was afraid to ask. "Why don't I feel what I once felt?" Anna. He couldn't understand her. It had been many years since she had been his wife. She was a quiet, intelligent woman with whom he felt comfortable. At first her silence had attracted him, her mysteriousness had seemed charming. But now her silence seemed something deeper, almost frightening. Anna was a woman who didn't throw words around, but her silence spoke more than any shout. There was something in her eyes that he couldn't explain. The same look that left no room for doubt. "I know more than you think." It was the look of someone who was capable of surviving the harshest of conditions. A woman who had been through a lot, and now, sitting in front of him, was calmly waiting for him to make his next move. And it was that calm gaze of hers that was shattering all his certainties. He was willing to do anything to feel her in his arms again, but Anna didn't seem interested in that. She no longer needed to respond to his words. He felt her ignoring him drive him into a corner, like a vice clutching his chest. Her gaze wasn't empty, wasn't indifferent. It was filled with something else, something he couldn't understand. Maybe the same frustration that grows not with every day, but with every year. A frustration that fades, but never goes away. When they met, he was sure she was the perfect woman for him. Stylish, intelligent, understated, the most beautiful, as if she herself was from another era. She was like a book character that could be idealized. But there was something wrong with that. That idealization was shattered every time he tried to look into her soul. She was a mystery that was impossible to solve. And that frightened him. Alexei wondered. Perhaps all this life, all this career, all this money and success, was nothing more than an attempt to fill the void inside him. He told himself that he would never depend on people, that his life was his choice, but every year he felt more and more pressured by his own mask. He became like a man who plays a role, forgetting that it is only a game. And now, in front of him, stood a woman he had once known, but who might not have been the same woman who had led him to success long ago. He didn't know when her image began to blur like fog at dawn. He couldn't understand when she stopped being part of his world and became an independent, real person, with her own experiences and thoughts. But Anna never told him that directly. She didn't pressure him, didn't try to judge him. Instead, she simply spoke, but in a way that made him realize for himself what the subject was about. "You often say you can't go on, that you're tired." Her words were calm, but full of meaning. "Do you really believe that by leaving you'll find the answer to your questions?" Her questions weren't accusations. She wasn't trying to get him to stay. She didn't want to even try to change him. But every question she asked made him question his decisions. He realized she wasn't just asking. She knows something. She understands something that he himself had not yet realized. And that knowledge disturbed him. He could feel his decisions becoming more and more of a mistake by the minute. He had thought the divorce was just a formality, but now he wasn't so sure. Anna's every word, her every silence, it was all becoming part of some kind of game he couldn't understand. He seemed to be deciding their fates, but in fact he and Anna were in a situation where things were far more complicated than he had realized. The quarrels that were happening now were strange. They weren't like they used to be, loud, with yelling and accusations. No, they were quiet. The quarrels turned into silences, into pauses, into the very moments when they both tried to say something but couldn't. It was a game of silence, where each said no, but his words went unheard. He was trying to find some answer, something he could do. But Anna wasn't looking for an answer. She gave him space to think, but she didn't become part of his anxiety. She was calm, but that calmness of hers was becoming his nightmare. At some point, he began to think that she wasn't even worried about the fact that he had proposed divorce. That frightening feeling that she had already accepted her fate, that there was no point in fighting for her. But why hadn't she fought? Why didn't she try to hold on to him? Alexei got up from his chair and went to the window. He looked at the city, which seemed so familiar and so foreign at the same time. The gleaming skyscrapers, the bustle of people below, the lights in the houses. It was all part of his life, part of his success. But now, as he looked out at the world, he felt alienated from everything that had once mattered. He was on the verge of losing everything: his career, his family, his children. And that frightening feeling was like a fog that was thickening, consuming everything around him. Something was wrong. And so, after everything that had happened between him and Anna, he began to realize that everything he knew about his marriage might be a lie. The world he lived in was no longer clear and understandable. His own thoughts began to become muddled. He didn't understand when exactly he had become what he was now, a man who had lost control of his own choices. What do I really have to lose if everything falls apart? That question never left him. Business? Yes, it was an important part of his life, but if family was lost, what would be left then? He knew that children were a part of his life that he couldn't just leave behind. But even so, he could feel his hands clenching, unable to hold it all together. He began to notice that everything that had seemed so clear, so simple, had become shaky and fragile. At this time Anna was sitting in her room, looking out the window, with an expression that Alexei could not understand. He did not know what she was thinking at that moment. But her silence was now something frightening. He knew she was hiding something, and he was ready to reveal it. "Do you want to ruin everything?" were the first words he said to her, unable to hold his thoughts in any longer. He approached her again, standing by the window, and she, without turning around, calmly answered, "I don't want to destroy, Alexei. I just can't live in the world you built for the two of us." He noticed how her voice was quiet but firm. She wasn't trying to convince him or accuse him. It was like a simple confession. She said it without emotion, but there was a power in her words that he couldn't ignore. "Do you realize that everything we've been building could come crashing down?" His voice trembled. Feelings of shame and regret fought inside him. He realized he had made a mistake, but he didn't know how to fix it. Anna was still silent, and there was more to her silence than simple ignoring. She knew something, and that something was what made him shiver. He was ready for any reaction, just not her silence. She just stood there, like someone who had already been through everything life had to offer him. Alexei couldn't stand the silence and spoke again. "Why are you silent? Why won't you tell me what you think? Why is everything so complicated?" Anna turned to him and her eyes met his gaze. She didn't look confused or frightened. On the contrary, she seemed calm, confident. But her gaze was what made him doubt. "Did you think I was just going to follow your rules?" Her words sounded calm, but every word was as sharp as a knife. "Did you think your world was my world too? That you and I lived in the same space?" Alexei felt the cold sweat protruding on his forehead. He realized that his ideas about family, about marriage, about what he had spent so long building, had nothing to do with the way Anna saw it all. She had been a part of his life, but she had never been fully a part of this world. "You never knew me, Alexei. You only knew someone who was convenient for you," she said. Her voice remained quiet, but with each word it sounded louder and more confident. Alexei felt his heart clench. He couldn't find the words. He was ready to listen, but he didn't know how to take her revelation. Anna continued. You always built a perfect world for us, but I was never a part of it. I played my part, but maybe you didn't realize that I stopped being just part of your picture a long time ago. Have you never noticed that I live in a different world? A world that has nothing to do with the one you create for us? He felt something snap inside him. Everything he had believed to be true was now beginning to crumble. He realized that they really did live in different worlds. Anna was building her life in the shadow of his greatness, playing the role of a successful billionaire's wife, but at the same time she was not part of the world Alexei was creating for himself. You've always been preoccupied with your success, Alexei. I don't judge you for that. But you didn't see me. You didn't see what I was going through all this time. I wasn't happy, despite everything you gave me. Her words were quiet, but they pierced his heart like a knife edge. Alexei didn't know what to say. He was seized with a mixture of shame and regret. He realized that all this time he had been living in an illusion. He thought that everything he did should make his family happy. But he never realized what really mattered to Anna. She continued. You built empires, but you couldn't build relationships. You thought you could just provide people with everything they wanted, but you forgot that's not where the true value lies. Alexei, realizing she was right, swallowed his words with difficulty. He realized that his feelings for her had never been what he thought they would be. His life had been centered on external accomplishments, but he hadn't noticed how Anna experienced every day, every moment. Her silence wasn't just silence. It was her life, her choices, her pain. Now that the secret was out, now that he realized they had been in different worlds all this time, Alexei felt all his confidence crumble. He realized that he had lost not only his wife, but also himself. It was as if time had stopped. Alexei stood in the center of the room, feeling the ground slipping from under his feet. He didn't know what to do, how to act. His whole life had been built on making decisions, on the ability to control everything around him, but now, at this moment, he was a complete slave to his own emotions. Everything that seemed familiar was crumbling. He didn't know how this moment would end, didn't know if he would be willing to live with it. Anna stood beside him, as calm as ever. Her gaze was direct, her face expressing nothing, no anger, no joy, no pain. Neither did her words, which seemed to have lost all meaning. She didn't try to hold on to him. She didn't try to fight for their relationship. Anna just watched him struggle with himself. Alexei looked at her and said, trying to get some confidence back into his voice. Anna, his words sounded like a last attempt to find a way back, to find a solution that would put things back on track. Don't you realize I'm doing this for us? For the two of us. It can't go on like this. You see that we can't be together anymore. Anna was silent, but her eyes were full of the same calmness that seemed to drive him to a standstill. He realized she could hear him, but her reaction was different. She didn't argue, didn't dismiss what he was saying. She didn't try to convince him otherwise. She just stood there, and there was more power in her silence than in all his speech. You don't understand, Alexei started again, but his voice trembled, as if he wasn't sure of his words. You've always been my rock, but now. He took a step toward her, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was her silence, which was growing heavier by the moment. Perhaps it was the realization that her silence was hiding much more than he was willing to accept. He was beginning to realize that Anna was actually in control of the situation, even if outwardly she was doing nothing. There was something frightening about her calmness. You don't know what you want, Alexei. Her voice was quiet but clear. You came here to get rid of me because it's more convenient for you. But you don't really want that. You want to get rid of your own emptiness, of what you've created. Alexei felt his heart squeeze. Those words had struck a nerve. She was talking about something he'd been avoiding all his life, his inner emptiness, what he'd hidden under layers of success and wealth. Anna wasn't just his wife. She was the only person who could see the real him, and he didn't like that. He'd thought her unknowable power was what he needed, but now he realized she wasn't his salvation. He could no longer live in a world where she simply reflected his own powerlessness. "You're telling the truth," he said finally, struggling to find the words. "I've been trying to make sense of everything around me, but it doesn't mean anything without you. You're what I lost, and I didn't even realize it until it was too late." Anna continued to stare at him with the same cold calm, not giving him the satisfaction of her answer. She wasn't smiling. She showed nothing but a firm conviction that none of this mattered. She knew that his words were empty, that there was no real change behind them. Alexei was saying what he wanted to hear himself say, but he didn't know how to turn it all into action. He was saying it to talk himself into believing that he could fix things, but she wasn't the one who could support him in that. "I can't go back in time, Alexei." Her words were resolute. "You're right, we've both lost too much time trying to go back to where we were once happy. We can't restore what was. And you know it yourself. We both know it." Her simple words shook him again. He wanted to hear that everything could be fixed, that everything could be brought back, that they could be happy again. But instead he heard the truth that was so unpleasant to him. He felt his heart break with pain, with the realization that they really couldn't go back. Alexei knew that this moment was key. He was facing the final choice: to stay with Anna and continue fighting for what was left, or to leave, to look for a new one, unencumbered by the past, easy and without obligations. But everything was muddled in his head. He didn't know which of these would be the right choice. "I can't leave," he said with difficulty, almost a whisper. "I can't just leave you, Anna." Anna looked up at him, and her eyes were full of the same calm. There was no regret in her gaze, no aggression. She just looked at him, and her silence was the final verdict. She didn't ask him to stay, didn't plead with him. She just knew she couldn't keep him anymore, and maybe she didn't even want to. "You're already gone, Alexei," she said, and her words were like cold rain falling on something that was burning. "You've been gone for a long time, and you're only now realizing it." He stood before her, realizing the hopelessness of his situation. He realized that they had both lost the opportunity to get back everything they had. All the attempts, all the talk of the past, of happiness, it was all a lie. Anna didn't try to stop him, because she understood that the choice had already been made, even if he himself hadn't realized it yet. Alexei was no longer the man he had been when they met, and probably never would be. At that moment he realized that his fate was sealed. He could leave and start over, but he knew he would never return to the life he had once built with Anna. And he probably couldn't even bring himself back. Alexei's fate depended on what he decided in that moment. But they both knew nothing would ever be the same. When he left, he didn't know what he was doing. There were only shadows of thoughts in his head, residual scraps of conversation, Anna's gaze, her words. It was all spinning like a merry-go-round in which he was the main actor. He left because he didn't know how else to end this nightmare they'd created together. He left because he couldn't carry the weight any longer. Alexei stood on the street, surrounded by the late afternoon light, and felt his life literally falling apart. The cars, the people, the noise, it was all alien. He himself was a stranger. He had lost his attachment to everything around him, and it was essentially rendering him meaningless. He tried to find the confidence that had once allowed him to make any decision, but now, in the void, there was only coldness and uncertainty. He realized that in leaving, he wasn't just leaving Anna. He was leaving everything. All the little details that had once made up his happy, full life. He was leaving his own image, the man who could control everything, who was on top. And now, in this new world, he was just one of those people that life didn't spare. He didn't know what would happen next. Did he even know what he wanted? He hadn't come to this divorce because his mind had decided so, but because his emotions had backed him into a corner. And now what? Everything was ruined. There was no certainty or meaning left in his life. He was gone, but he wasn't free. He was trapped in something he'd created himself. And perhaps that was part of his punishment. He didn't know what would happen next, but he couldn't go back. Anna, on the other hand, stayed in the same house. She didn't try to bring him back. She didn't try to stop him. She wasn't doing anything to hold him back. She was simply accepting the moment that had come. And now, in the emptiness of their shared world, she was the one left behind. But not because she was weak, but because she had accepted her fate. She sat in the same chair, in the same place where he had sat before. She was not crying. She didn't feel the need for tears. She was ready. She didn't stay in the marriage because she was afraid. She didn't stay for money or status. She stayed because she realized she couldn't change the past. She couldn't bring back what was gone. And perhaps now she, like him, was on a journey of finding herself. But there was one important difference. Alexei left because he didn't know who he really was, and Anna stayed because she already knew who she was. She wasn't trying to build a new life. She had already lived it. And now she was waiting. Perhaps she waited to see what would happen next, perhaps to meet her fate face to face, the way she had learned to do it. Time passed. Alexei tried to get some relief, but his attempts were unsuccessful. Everything he'd built seemed like an illusion. Everything he thought was important was ultimately nothing. He felt like he couldn't go back to the world he knew. But he couldn't move forward either, because he didn't know what to do with himself. He felt an emptiness, and that emptiness wasn't just an experience, it was part of his existence. His days became monotonous. He continued to conduct business, to make decisions, but every step he took was burdened with this new feeling, a sense of loss. He tried to find meaning, but his life was disordered, like a lost traveler. He tried to regain control, but he lost it even earlier. Time passed. Alexei and Anna never met. He went on with his life, she with hers. He tried to find someone to forget, but all these attempts were in vain. He was never able to find what he was looking for. His inner conflict remained, and he didn't know how to deal with it. He realized that he was missing what he used to have, but now it had become impossible. Anna was like something that was a part of him, but at the same time could not be a part of his future. Anna, in turn, began to rethink her life. She realized that this emptiness was not something terrible, but on the contrary, an opportunity for growth. She didn't want to go into a new future with the same burdens as before. She accepted her loneliness, accepted her independence. Her life wasn't ruined, her life was redefined. And so in this moment, when neither of them were looking for the other, when they both realized that they couldn't go back to the way things were and the future was now uncertain for them, they both began to see the light at the end of the tunnel. They weren't happy, but they were ready to move forward, each on their own path, leaving behind what once was. But something important remained in that finale. The question of what would come next was not answered. The questions that haunted them were not closed. The viewer might ask themselves the same question: what now? Will they remain as they were, or will each take on new meaning? Will something of the love that once bound them together remain, or will it fade away like everything else? They both found something important within themselves, but what they found remained undefined. Not all the answers were answered, and that uncertainty remained their shared experience that they would continue to live with.